All right, we are in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, and notice what it says in verse 4. It says, "When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that thou hast vowed. Better is it that thou shouldst not vow than that thou shouldst vow and not pay. Suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin, neither say thou before the angel that it was an error. Wherefore should God be angry at thy voice and destroy the work of thy hands?" And I want you to notice this passage about vows here. It's showing you need to take these things seriously. Nobody's making you take these vows. You are choosing to do it. And don't think after you make a vow, you can say, "Well, I didn't realize what I was saying. I was making a mistake." You're going to look like a fool, and your mouth is going to cause your flesh to sin. And so as Bible-believing Christians, we often get falsely accused of many things that simply aren't true, but that's okay. We're blessed when this happens. The Bible tells us, "Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." A lot of people think they're blessed just because they're persecuted. It's like, well, if you're not being persecuted for righteousness' sake, then it doesn't count. Okay, that's just you being persecuted for being rotten. It's when it's falsely. It says, "Blessed are you when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake." If they're saying evil about you and it's true, no reward for that. Just them spitting facts. "Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which are before you." And as Christians, as traditional Christians, as biblical Christians, the world often, criticizes us for our views on women and, submission and things like that. And they don't like what the Bible says. They don't like what they're hearing, even though it's biblical, even though it's accurate, even though it works. So they got to find a way to demonize us. And sometimes they just say things so much that are wrong and that are negative, we almost start to believe them if we're not careful. And then you always have the nut job Baptists that will just act like what they're saying is true, and then they just kind of go to extremes on things. And it's just like, hey, we don't need to be weirdos here. But either way, what they're saying just is factually incorrect. And so we get accused of being demeaning to women because we teach that women should submit to their husbands, even though it's not demeaning if a woman submits to her male boss at work, but it's demeaning if women submit to their husbands, and that's just foolish. It doesn't make sense, and that's not consistent. And the reality is, the feminists of this world, if anybody's demeaning to women, it's them. I mean, for sure, because they're the ones that devalue women, because they act like, women fulfilling their God-given roles, their instinctive roles, following nature, that they're somehow second class because of it. And that, to me, is demeaning to women. And in fact, too, they're being demeaning to most of women throughout history whenever they do that, and even most women today. But I do want to point out a few common sense facts for everyone today that just proves we as Bible-believing Christians, we are actually the ones that support women's rights in reality. And we are actually just consistent in our views, unlike the world. Our world's very inconsistent. And I think this can all be proved and illustrated through just looking at marriage itself and what it actually is, what it biblically is, and what is even reflected too in the traditional wedding vows that we're going to talk about tonight that I think many people forget about. When you look at just what is stated in your traditional wedding vows, you see just the beauty of marriage and what it is, and how, if anything, it lifts up and it honors women in a great way. But people forget about that. And I think part of it too is just a lot of weddings today. And listen, if anybody ever wants to get married in this church, we don't do this thing where people write their own vows. That is the dumbest thing. I hate it. And I hate movies when they do it and they read it's so stupid. Okay? We are not going to let you make your own vows. You know why? Because if you are entering into marriage, marriage means something. You are agreeing to certain things, and we're going to make sure you understand that. So we're going to get you up here, and we're going to make you promise those things. And if you're not willing to agree to those terms, if you're not willing to get up here and make a solemn vow to follow those terms, then you know what? Don't do your wedding here. Go have your wedding. Go go hire a justice of the peace somewhere. Go hire some homo to perform your wedding ceremony for you, because we're not going to do that here. We're going to make sure you know what you're getting yourself into, and you're going to be agreeing to some stuff. And you're going to do it in front of everybody. And so if you want to have a part where you say your emotional stuff to each other, we'll throw that in there somewhere. But we're doing the traditional vows somewhere in the wedding, and because I think that stuff is foolishness. But before we get to the wedding vows, I do want to show how we as traditional Christians, we support women's rights, and we are actually the ones who believe in their autonomy. Okay, and that scares some of you, because some of you you've believed, or you've just taken an opposite stance of what the feminists say about us, even though they're lying. And then it's like you feel like, well, because they're against it, I got to be for it. But they're falsely accusing you of some things. What they're saying is just not true, and it doesn't even make logical sense. And marriage proves all that. But again, I don't want to get ahead of myself. But I do want to show how we're the ones that actually recognize the authority that you have as women, the rights that you have as women. And notice what it says in Genesis 24:57, and it says, "And they said, we will call the damsel and inquire at her mouth." This is when Abraham's servant went to find a bride for Isaac, and he spots Rebekah, and he said, she would be perfect for my master's son. They said, "Go inquire at her mouth." And they called Rebekah and said unto her, "Wilt thou go with this man?" And she said, "I will go." Notice, nobody made Rebekah marry Isaac. This is a good verse. This is a great picture, too, of Jesus Christ and his bride, the church. And guess what? You know what? This debunks Calvinism, too. She had a choice. And we do. We believe that, and while there have been cultures throughout time who have practiced arranged marriages, and women who have been forced into marriage, there is nothing in the Bible to indicate that's a good idea or that it should be done. And let me just say, we don't believe in arranged marriages here. Okay? My daughters, they cannot marry whoever they want with my blessing. But let me tell you this right now, I will never make them marry somebody they don't want to marry. I don't believe in that. That's not right. No, that man, he's got to win me over to even get a chance. But then after I give him the chance, he's got to win her over. And I'll say more about that here in a second. But I don't know any Christians who practice arranged marriages. I certainly do not. I would never perform a wedding of a couple where either of the two were not willing to enter into that marriage. In fact, typically, when I do marriage counseling before a couple gets married, typically what I do, I'd see if I can talk them out of it a little, Not because I don't want them to get married, but I do it trying to make sure they're serious about it. I try to tell them, hey, do you know what you're getting yourself into? Here's some challenges you're going to be up against. I want to make sure they understand it. And it's customary, and I believe even biblical, for men to ask the father's permission to marry and even date the daughter. And after the father gives his approval of that, then the man, what does he do? He asks the woman. And you know what? She has the power to say no. You know why? Because we believe in their self-government. We believe in their autonomy. And so they can. And when Alex asked to have it, he had to ask her. And she said yes. And she could have said no. She could have sent him back. And let me just say this too. Even at this point right now, she can say, "Hit the road, Jack." All right, you can do that if you want. You're allowed to. I'm not going to make her marry him, even at this point. Listen, I've already spent some money on the wedding, and I still wouldn't make her get married at this point. But and she does. She still has a lot of power right now. Right now, she's got all kinds of power. I did not force my wife to marry me. I will never force my daughters to marry anyone. And understand these practices. It makes it very difficult for your Taliban Baptist wannabes out there who all have severe BO. It's always the single punks with no wives that are always calling for, these type of things, because it's the only way they're going to get a woman. If some woman gets forced to marry them, that's they do. There's these guys, they think they have a right to a woman just because they're of the male gender. But just understand, they do. They want a submissive wife, but what they do not understand, this is just a secret for all men out there and here, or who might listen to this sermon. the submissive wife, understand, she is also going to be submissive to her father. A woman who's not submissive to her father is not going to submit to you either. So understand, this custom of asking a father's permission, while that's too much effort for Taliban Baptists with severe BO, just understand that you don't get a submissive wife without that. Because girls who don't submit to their dads don't submit to their husbands either. So just, you know what? While it might not be fun going through a dad, that's how you get the good ones. You know, the reality is the more hoops you have to jump through, the more likely you probably are to get a good one. So just keep all those things in mind. But also that practice too, it makes it impossible for the low character individuals to get a good wife. Because if you're just one of these punk dudes that think you have the right to beat up on a wife, and you just think you're somehow owed a wife because you're a dude, and you're like in your early 20s, and you look like you just rolled out of bed all the time, you smell, the dad's going to see that and going to be like, low character bum. You play video games all day in your mom's basement. He's not giving you a chance. And you know what? Even if somehow you convince that girl, you slid into her DMs or something like that, and you convinced her that you're a catch, understand, if she is a submissive woman, she's going to listen to her dad when he says, no, don't even give that bum a chance. And she's going to listen to him. So that's what these guys need to get a hold of. They're not going to get that submissive wife the way that they're trying. It just doesn't work that way. The dads scare away the low character dudes. And so here's where the feminists do. They find themselves in all kinds of confusion. The feminists, they talk a big game about women's rights. They even will say, we support your right to enter into marriage. But the problem with feminists, they don't even understand what marriage is. Because I'm going to tell you right now, I would say probably 100% of your short-haired, blue-haired feminists believe gay marriage is okay too. You know what that shows? They don't know what marriage is. When you think two dudes can get married or two women can get married, you don't even know what marriage is. And when your worldview and morals are twisted that bad, when you are so twisted morally, you think two dudes can get married, understand consistency in your views will not exist. It's just not possible. But there's always consistency in truth. And what feminists don't understand about Christian women is that Christian women willingly made a sacred vow, and they chose to be wives knowing exactly what they were getting themselves into. And don't come to me after church so nobody told me I was tricked. We just already read that verse in Ecclesiastes 5. You know what? You made yourself look bad. You should have figured it out, what you were getting yourself into. But in this church, we're going to make you aware of what you're getting yourself into. And when you do, you made a solemn vow to enter into that arrangement, to enter into marriage, which, by the way, does require submission to your husband. And we'll talk about that. And so I don't understand how it's demeaning. I don't understand how it's devaluing women. No, listen, we put all the authority and all the power on the women, and guys bent over backwards, and they took showers, they put on deodorant, they turned on the charm, they did all these things to win your heart. They dated you, they bought you things, they did all these things so you would say yes. And you say, well, they tricked me. Well, that was your own fault. You should have done your due diligence. You should have sought some counsel. And then you did. You got up and you made a solemn vow to follow him and to submit to him and listen to him. And you did. We gave you all that power. And then you are willingly surrendered that power and authority when you made that vow. And so just understand that, that's not demeaning to women. We just are expecting you to honor your vows that you willingly entered into. And so, we'll say more about that as we go. But while feminists love to talk about respecting women's choices, they only respect the choices they agree with, because they're hypocrites. And the marriage vows that a woman makes to a man are sacred. There's something that they make expecting something in return. We'll talk about that. And because when they enter into a marriage, the man also makes sacred vows to her as well. No one forced either of them into this. They chose it, and it will be a great day when you figure out no one made you get married, and if you got tricked, that's on you. Okay, just listen, don't get tricked. Okay, don't get tricked. That's what dating's for. You have time to figure these things out. But the problem with the modern culture and the feminists, they have no respect for what is sacred. They have no respect for someone's vows. They feel like it's liberating to allow people to just get out of arrangements however they want. They think it's liberating to tell people your word means nothing. But I'm sorry, that's not pleasing to God. That's wrong, it's unjust, and it's unfair for many reasons. Look what it says in Numbers chapter 30. It says, Moses spake unto the heads of the tribes concerning the children of Israel, saying, This is the thing which the Lord hath commanded. If a man vow a vow unto the Lord, or swear an oath to bind his soul with the bond, he shall not break his word, he shall do according to all that proceedeth out of his mouth. If a woman voweth a vow unto the Lord, and bind herself by a bond, being in her father's house in her youth. And I'll stop there for a second. Notice, you're doing this to yourself. Okay? You know how men, they often refer to the wives as the old ball and chain? Well, you chose it. You willingly went forward and said, I want the ball and chain. You say that sounds terrible. It's called the bonds of holy matrimony. Nobody made you do it. You willingly got into it. But folks, when you get married, you're getting into something. And you say, well, I just wanted to be able to fool around and all that kind of stuff. Well, then you should have joined the fornicators in the world. And how's that going for them? It's not going well for them. No, you chose to enter into marriage. And so if a woman bind herself by a bond, she has the power to bind. But understand, she bound herself. Nobody made her do this. Nobody made her vow that vow. And ladies, nobody made you get married. Nobody made you get married. You bound yourself. Well, I was watching Ellen DeGenerate and she said I'm bound. She said I'm in prison. Yeah, you chose that. You made a vow to do that kind of thing. Don't act like a victim. Don't act like it was an error. No, you chose to do this. And listen, there's some benefits. There's many benefits that come with it. There's some blessings that come with it, but you're still bound. But you bound yourself. You know why? Because you have all the authority. You have power. You have that autonomy, and you made the choice to bind yourself. And men, we're doing the same thing. We're making the choice to bind ourselves. And I don't know about you, I'm okay with that. I'm completely okay with that. You say you're making it sound bad. I'm not trying to, but I think it's a good thing. But in verse 4, and so talking about the woman after she makes a vow, it says, and her father hear the vow, and her bond wherewith she hath bound her soul, and her father shall hold his peace at her. Then shall all her vows shall stand, and every bond wherewith she hath bound her soul shall stand. But if her father disallow her in the day that he heareth, not any of her vows or of her bonds wherewith she hath bound her soul shall stand, and the Lord shall forgive her, because her father disallowed her. And it's the same thing with a husband. Because again, the woman is under the authority of the father, and then a woman is under the authority of the husband. And so they do have the authority to say, hang on a second, you're not allowed to make that promise. If my wife after church is like, you know what, we're going to pay your rent for the next year. I promise. You know what, I can come along and be like, no, we don't. She can't make that promise. And she's not a liar because of it, because when I heard, I disallowed her. And I said, no, we don't have the ability to do that. And so it's the same thing with the daughter. So it's showing that there. But I show all that to show when people make these vows, they are binding themselves. They are willingly enter into these things. And so I am fully aware of the marriage vows my daughter's planning on making in the near future. And while in our current system of government in America, she doesn't need my permission in America. Okay? But understand, in the eyes of God, she would be rebelling against me, and she would be in the wrong if she were to marry somebody without my blessing and against my will. And you know what? She would have to deal with the consequences of that kind of thing. But I'm afraid when it comes to the wedding vows, it's like we only say them once, and it's like we forget them. We just forget the vows that we made. I mean, I've literally seen recently even serial adulterers mad at their wives for leaving them, and they're like, I don't want to get divorced, I'm going to keep my vow. It's like, too late, buddy. Wait, did you forget what you vowed? There's a bunch of things in there. It's not about just staying married. There's a bunch of things in here. It's like, I don't think they paid any attention to it. And I understand not everyone in the world uses the same vows that I use when performing weddings, but I'm sure most of them are pretty close if you're getting married in a Christian church. And, so the vows I use when performing marriage, I do believe accurately reflect biblical marriage. We make sure we tell people, hey, do you solemnly swear? Do you promise? Why? Because when you're marrying somebody, marriage means something. And so what are some of these things we can learn from the marriage vows? Because these vows do matter, even if our society doesn't care. Our society will let you get out of these things. They completely disregard what God said. The Bible says what God hath joined together, let not man put asunder, but man puts asunder for pretty much anything. But God doesn't see it that way. And so in the vows, the way we'll do it, I'll usually start with the men, and I'll say, do you, say the name of the person, promise to love, honor, and cherish your wife? That's actually biblical. Husbands, Ephesians 5:25, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, and that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. Colossians 3:19, husbands, love your wives and be not bitter against them. And so a woman who enters into a biblical marriage is entering into an arrangement with a man who is making a sacred vow to love, honor, and cherish her. How is that demeaning to women? How is that devaluing to women? So she has to listen. Yeah, she has to listen, but that man who has to listen to has promised that he's going to love her, he's going to honor her, and he's going to cherish her. And see, our world, they think it's demeaning because there are slime buckets out there who do not love their wives, who do not cherish their wives, who do not honor their wives, who are cruel to their wives, and they abuse their wives. And so they, in their mind, they think they've got to listen to an animal like that. No, she's making a vow to listen to a guy to follow a guy who is also vowing to love, honor, and cherish her. And listen, no husband's going to be perfect in this. Okay? No husband 24/7 is going to be perfect for the rest of his life or her life. But this is the promise. This is the goal. There should be a real effort into doing this. We see in 1 Peter 3:17, likewise ye husbands dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife. Folks, it's not demeaning to expect your wife to submit. That's just what the feminists say. That's what our world says. No, this woman who is submitting to us is a woman who entered into that role willingly. She made a vow that she was going to obey, that she was going to submit, because we made a vow, we made a promise that we would love, honor, and cherish her. And so I don't see how that's demeaning to women. I think us understanding that we don't get that woman, we don't get to be physical with her, we don't get all these benefits of having a woman until we are willing to make a solemn vow in the eyes of man and in the eyes of God that we're going to love her, honor her, and cherish her forever. That is the vow. Because we actually value women. We give honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. And so, like I said, while we're not going to be perfect in this area, while there's going to be slip-ups, the husbands are going to mess up, the wives are going to mess up. What it does mean, though, is we can't allow certain practices to just become normal. Okay? And you might slip up, but listen, it's not okay when you made a vow to honor your wife to just regularly be calling her demeaning names. You show me one verse of the Bible that says I can't call my wife the B word or something like that. You're supposed to honor your wife. How is that honoring her? That's demeaning. There's your verse right there. You freak. You weirdo. Show me a verse of the Bible that says I can't hurt my wife. Giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel. There's your verse. You freak. You weirdo. But again, any time something like this does happen, when you mess up, she does have every right. She is not going against your authority. She is not ruling over you if she expects you to fix these things. Hey, ladies, you're allowed to expect your husband to keep his vows. You're allowed to do that. And if things are going wrong, it's not wrong. Women are not out of lines to say, hey, I think you need to get some help. I think we might need some counseling here. And again, the Taliban Baptists, they act like when a couple gets married, that because the husband is the head of the wife, that means there's no accountability anywhere. And listen, there's a lot of nut jobs out there. There's a lot of nut job preachers out there. They hate accountability. You know what it's called? Despising dominion. Bible talks about those false prophets. They despise dominion. They refuse to have any type of regulating force in their life at all. They love being the pastor because I'm accountable to God, which they are their own God. And they prove it when they will completely disregard what the Bible says, and they have a congregation that has no power over them whatsoever. And it's like this, it's pretty common amongst a lot of Baptists, no accountability for the pastor whatsoever. That's not right. That's not okay. No, people ought to be able to expect certain things from the pastor. They ought to expect him to follow a church constitution and bylaws and things like that. There should be a system and a way of holding him accountable. But no, they even against an elder receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses, I've heard them get up and say, I don't care if there's 2 or 3 witnesses. So in other words, the pastor is God in your freakish cult that you're in. And let me tell you, husbands, you are the head of the wife, but again, you are also under the authority of God. And even if you're a part of a church, we have a right to expect you to follow the Word of God. And here's the thing too, I think the government ought to force you to do enforce some things too. You say, I don't like that. Well, here's the thing too, there are people out there and there's been a debate in the past about whether or not the government should be involved in marriage. I'm not going to take time to prove it. I believe they should. You know why? Because who's supposed to put your carcass to death if you're out there, committing all these abominations and things like that? It's the government that has the power to do those things. It's the government that has power to lay stripes on people and things like that. And it's the government, who does the marriage licenses and holds people accountable in these things. And when a woman or a man, they willingly enter these things and people aren't following it, somebody ought to hold these people accountable. And you know what? It would help a lot of marriages out if somebody took a rod to these fools' backs. And that would help a lot if they would give them some lashes and things like that. But no, our world's not doing that. And so, since our government's not doing anything, everybody's like, well, God's over me. Which just means I'm the husband, I'm God. My wife can't say anything. She can't expect me to get any kind of counseling or anything like that. And I just think that's ridiculous. Marriage is a public thing. It is performed by the government, and certain violations of those sacred vows should be punished. I believe that. If a man's committing adultery on his wife, she should have the right to turn him into the authorities. If a woman's being beaten and abused by her husband, somebody needs to hold that man accountable. He made vows. He promised to love, honor, and cherish her. She's being abused. She's being assaulted. Somebody needs to hold that creep accountable. And I don't agree with this idea that if somebody calls their cops on their husband who's beating them, that they're a terrible person. I think you're a freak if you think that. Because somebody needs to hold. Nobody entered into that. My daughter, the reason I support her marrying somebody is because he's planning on promising to love, honor, and cherish her. And you know what? If nobody else holds him to it, I'll hold him to it. Say, well, you'll go to jail. I mean, better than my wife being with a bum that's beating on her and things like that. Listen, you say, that would be murder. I think it's justifiable, but obviously, but at the same time, somebody's got to hold these people accountable. That's vigilante justice. Well, you all go ahead and punish me when I take the law into my own hands. All right, but either way, they don't have the right to do that, and so. A woman does not have... Now, here's the other thing, too. While I do think there are legitimate reasons for somebody to call the authorities on a husband or something like that, A woman does not have the right, and a woman would be wicked to go around threatening her husband with those things. And let me tell you, there are women out there who make false claims. That is wicked. And I know people have been destroyed because of things like that. And the solution is just women can never call the cops on their husband. No, but women are wicked and evil, and they ought to be able to get in trouble for making false claims. Well, listen, when you falsely accuse somebody, you ought to get the punishment that they would have gotten if it was true. And women who do that kind of thing, understand, they are the ones who have created the mess for the real victims that are out there. And that's why that is one, and that's a whole other sermon for another day. But falsely accusing anybody, especially your husband, is beyond wicked. And if you're just trying to use those things to control and manipulate them, you are so wicked, and you are why we have people out there who want a Taliban-type marriage and government system. And you have no right to do that kind of thing. Making a false claim, it's beyond wicked. A woman does not have the right, and a woman will be wicked and evil to just weaponize laws against their husband, and especially bad ones. Understand that. And, in our world today, you do pretty much anything to somebody that they don't like, you can call the cops on them and something will probably happen to them. That's messed up. Okay? I'm not talking about your husband got mad and, real situation, threw a bottle of pills at you. Or your wife, it was actually the wife threw the bottle of pills at her husband. He called the cops on her. It's just like, are you kidding me? Okay, that is not, again, our government says that's not assault. Okay, and I shouldn't have to qualify it by saying, it's something legitimate. But, these days you lay your hand on somebody, you can get nailed for assault. Okay? That's ridiculous. And if you ever take the patheticness of our laws and use them against your husband or wife, you are garbage. You're just a garbage human being. And so just keep all those things in mind. And so when I say a woman has a right to require and expect certain things, an example of what I mean by that, because I believe if a husband is failing in fulfilling his obligation to love, honor, and cherish his wife, she has the right to hold him accountable and say something, and by saying something to him about it. But I also believe that, if she's right, okay, in a perfect world, the husband should be willing to get counseling if it's needed while his wife is wanting it. But again, understand too, because that's just your wife expecting you to keep your vows and trying to hold you accountable somehow. But here's why many would take issue with what I'm saying about that. Because if I were to make a rule that said if your wife tells you you need to go to counseling, you should go to counseling, then you know what your wife's going to do all the time? Every time you get mad at him, we're going to counseling. Pastor says the wife should have authority on these things and has the right to tell you that. And so you made me mad because I wanted to go to McDonald's and you went to Burger King. We're going to counseling. No. Okay? That's ridiculous. Obviously, I'm talking about real, legitimate situations. And some of the things husbands and wives have knockdown dragouts for are ridiculous. You both just need to work on yourself. Okay? Please don't bring me into this. I mean, I will if I have to. But, be prepared for some insults in that counseling session because it's not going to be good. And just understand that marriage counseling card, you're only going to get to play it so many times. If you're just constantly playing it, it's not going to have an effect anymore. It's kind of like tears. Tears can be effective, in getting a message across that I'm serious and I'm really upset. But if you cry about everything, pretty soon they don't care anymore. So just understand, you only have a few of those cards. Use them wisely, and they'll be effective. And I can't tell you where all the lines are on these things. I'm not even going to try. I'm just giving some general principles. And I will say, though, that, again, you're only going to get to do these things rarely. And they're going to lose their effect. And so, in those vows, we tell them, do you promise to love, honor, and cherish? We say, do you promise to stand by her in sickness or health, poverty or wealth? I haven't put this in there. I know a pastor who does this. He also puts in there, and it probably needs to go in there, for fat or for skinny. Because you know what? Yeah, that might happen. Yeah, it probably is going to happen. And you know what you don't get to do? I don't like the way she looks at it. You don't get, no. She might look great that day you get married, but you know what? Hormones and age and babies, it changes people. And guys, we just, get comfortable and enjoy the cooking a little too much. And, the shapes change. And you know what? Deal with it. You don't get to throw them out after that. And so, the preachers that do that, I think I could probably get on board with that. It might sound kind of funny, but let me just say, I do think it stands. I do think, you don't have the right to dump your spouse because they put on too much weight. Just that would be very wrong. That would be wicked to do that kind of thing. Marriage is always going to come with challenges. There's going to be physical challenges, mental challenges, emotional challenges. There's going to be circumstantial challenges, tragedies. There's going to be financial setbacks, personal battles with friends, family, church drama. I mean, you have to fight through all these things together. And you do. On that wedding day, you're happy, you're excited, you're anxious what's coming. But you know what? There's going to be difficult days ahead, and you don't get the bail. And you're promising. You willingly going into that, that things aren't always going to be great. There's going to be challenges. We don't know what they're going to be, but here's what we both are agreeing on. We promise we're staying together. I promise we're staying together. And listen, women are going to get a little wacky too with the hormones and the postpartum and all that kind of stuff. They're going to get a little crazy sometimes. And you know what? That's part of it. And you got to stick with her, stay with her. But you know what? As a husband, God fortunately gave us more regulated hormones than the women. But at the same time, it's our job to lead. And I love what Jacob said in Genesis 33:12 when his brother Esau was like, hey, let's take this journey. Let's get going. But he said, let us take our journey and let us go, and I will go before thee. And he said unto him, my Lord knoweth that the children are tender, and the flocks and herds with young are with me. And if men should overdrive them one day, all the flock will die. Let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before a servant, and I will lead on softly, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure until I come unto my Lord unto Seir. Most people would call Jacob a wimp because he led softly. Psst, what kind of leadership is that? A kind of guy that was able to raise up a nation. A kind of guy who didn't kill his wives on the journey. A guy who sojourned in tents and did many, many great things. That's who did that. And you need to understand that men, it's your job to lead your wife, but you need to be aware of what she is capable of. I have been falsely accused. It has been taken back. I will admit they have taken it back. That I, have given my wife the authority of how many kids, or like when we're going to have kids and things like that. And because I have made statements in the past about how I want to make sure she's ready for it. Because she goes through all the physical pain. She carries a child for 9 months. She gives birth. She nurses. She does all of these things. And as a husband trying to lead, I need to be aware of where she's at physically, mentally, emotionally, hormonally, all that stuff. I need to be aware of those things, and to not take that kind of thing into consideration, I think is pretty cruel. It's not giving her authority, it's me as the authority. It'd be like a boss at work, just up in production all the time. Well, why do you keep raising the production? Because I'm a strong leader. Yeah, but your workers can't handle that. Well, they're going to have to figure it out. And then I'm killing my workers. I'm causing them all to get hurt, and people are getting injured and all these things. It's not, they're just weak. How dare they get hurt? Well, you made them do too much work too fast. You need to understand, people are only capable of so much. And there's a lot of chest thumpers out there who they go around just putting unrealistic expectations on their wives. And just understand, you have those kids, and you have those kids. I mean, listen, I will never get up and regulate anybody's kids for them. But just understand, those kids, raising them is a challenge. It's a lot of work. And, and everybody's all anxious to have those kids, and we're going to homeschool all of them, and you have those kids together early. But then, boy, when you start homeschooling, that's a lot of work. I mean, that is a lot of work, and it's still overwhelming sometimes, and I don't even do it. My wife does. Thinking, we've had 4 graduate, and Hannah's just getting started. I mean, we've got to go through the whole cycle again, and she's 45. I mean, it's a challenging thing. You need to understand what you're getting yourselves into, and make sure you're ready and aware of what's going on. And that's what we do as husbands. That's how we lead. Not all women are equal in strength, physically, mentally, emotionally. Know your wife. Oh, well, Mrs. Duggar, she had 19 kids. Why can't my wife have 19 kids? Again, some women aren't built for that. And I'm not real sure she did that great either, considering how some of them turned out. And too, there's some people out there too who they're having all these kids, and what they don't tell you too, some of them are well off and they hire nannies, cleaning ladies, cooks, all these things. I can't afford that. So they don't tell you all that stuff. And understand too, these women back in those days, they had all kinds of handmaids and things like that too, that did a lot of the work for them. So in the Bible, this woman, she had a bunch of kids, yeah, and she had a whole bunch of handmaids too. You going to go hire some handmaids? No, you don't even give your wife an allowance. So just understand, you're not like the people in the Bible. Okay? You're not. And let me tell you, most of these BO types out there who are putting all these expectations on their wives, in reality, they probably should only have 2 kids. Because that's all they can handle. That's all they're capable of. And I would probably still feel sorry for their 2 kids because of their low character. But yet they think there's something special because they're gonna have 14 kids or whatever. And they're not going to take care of any of them. Their kids are all going to grow up hating them. They're going to turn out to be derelicts and worthless bums. So just, you got to know your wife. And there's some women out there, there are women out there whose husbands need to tell them to shape up. There's women out there, yeah, they're capable of more. There's women out there that are being selfish. There's women out there who are just being lazy. And you know what? Their husbands, they need to tell them to shape up. But there's other husbands out there, they need to lighten up too. Just know your wife. And the reality is, if you actually love your wife, you'll know what to do. So what do I need to do? I don't know. You're supposed to know your wife. You're supposed to know your situation. Sometimes husbands do. They need to know what's going on. Dwell with them according to knowledge. Okay? Don't ask me to make those choices. I don't know your wife. It's not my job to know your wife. It's your job to know your wife. And so it also in the vows, it says, forsaking all others, remain faithful unto her as long as you both shall live. The Bible says in Luke 16:18, whosoever putteth away his wife and marrieth another committeth adultery. Whosoever marrieth her that is put away from her husband committeth adultery. And this is again, watching a man out there take a stand about his marriage vows and the sanctity of staying married after being a serial adulterer is pretty nauseating. It's just like, what is wrong with you, man? No. That woman whose body you have a right to if you're married, you have that right to her only because she willingly entered into that marriage and she made a vow to submit to you and to give herself to you if you would also promise you're the only one. And let me tell you, every wife has the right to expect their husbands for them to be the only one. And my wife, she has dealt with women, she has had women contact her before whose husbands were putting demands on them to allow him to have other women on the side. Yes. And if you want to know what kind of freaks they were, they can be explained in 4 letters. And I don't even say what they are. Starts with an N. And has if in the middle and stands for Baptist at the end. That's the freaks. These are the kind of weirdos that we've dealt with. People, I'm the husband. No, she never agreed. You made a vow not to do that. She willingly entered into that marriage knowing that you were promising it was just her. And so you don't get to do that, and you don't get to act like a victim. And even if your wife was dumb enough to give you the okay on something like that, I mean, Sarah and Hagar, do we not learn from that? That kind of things never work. Even if your wife was dumb enough to give you permission or something like that, that was you going against your vow. That was a foolish, idiotic thing, and it's against God. For sure. And so, Hebrews 13:4 says, marriage is honorable and all, and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. And you know what happens in 100% of situations where the wife is dumb enough to go along with something like that? 100% of the time, she regrets it, resents him, is angry over it, and everything falls apart. And then the guy, always acts like a victim. The guy always acts like a victim in that situation. You know, I did this and this and this and this, and my wife left me. Well, you think it's biblical for her to leave? No, but I also don't think any of that other stuff was biblical. And you want to know what's going to happen when you do a bunch of unbiblical things to people? They're going to do unbiblical things back to you. Just expect that kind of thing to happen. So, we asked the woman in the vows, do you promise to love, honor, cherish, and obey? We add that in there. With the man, we say, do you promise to love, honor, and cherish? With the woman, do you promise to love, honor, cherish, and obey? And listen, if any lady's not willing to say that, if I was performing a marriage, and when I got to the vows, she refused to say obey, then you know what? I guess we're done. I guess you're leaving him at the altar. Because you know what? It's not a marriage if you're going in there as like these equals in the sense of, you know, we both have equal say. No, the husband is supposed to lead the wife. That's what marriage is. Say, Pastor Tommy, that would be terrible. That would be awkward. I can't believe you would do that to a woman in a wedding. I'm not doing anything to a woman, okay? I mean, if I had any fault in that, it would be maybe I didn't warn her ahead of time that she's got to promise to obey him. Okay? And I do warn people about that. And if she refused to do something like that, I'm not performing, because as far as I'm concerned, that's not a marriage. But ladies, when you enter into marriage, you're agreeing to this guy who's promising himself only to you, who's promising to love, honor, and cherish. He expects some things in return, and you know one of the things he expects you to listen to him. He expects you to follow his lead and obey him. We talked about this, I think, last week. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life, Proverbs 31:12. Colossians 3:18, wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as it is fit in the Lord. And the feminists, they flip out at the idea of the woman obeying her husband. But I'm sorry, that's just marriage. That's part of the deal. When a man marries a woman, he's making that sacred vow to keep himself only to her, even though men naturally are prone to go after others and things like that. But he is agreeing, you know what? I am going to limit myself to just her. I am going to love her. I'm going to protect her. He is called by God to give himself for her. He's even called by God and expected to give his life for her. If you're sinking on a ship, your wife gets on the life raft before you do. If a burglar comes in, you take the bullet before your wife does. You should be willing to give your life for your wife. You are the protector. You are the provider. And let me tell you, if you're the protector and the provider, you better believe you have a right to make a few rules. And you know what's amazing? You know, we have people today, they're wanting the government in charge of more and more of their life, but then they don't like when they take more and more power. It's like, what do you want? Do you want to be autonomous, or do you want the government to take care of you? Because listen, you want me to take care of you, you better believe I'm making all the rules. You want me to pay your bills for you, I'm going to tell you how you can spend your money, if that's the case. And understand, women, they want their husbands to love them, keep themselves onto them, protect them. But you know what? Then you better obey him. If you want him to protect you, then you need to listen to him. And if he says, don't go here, don't do this because you won't be safe, you know what you need to do? You need to listen. So I've been taking karate classes, and I've watched all these Hollywood movies where women beat up guys twice their size. I think I can take these guys. No, you can't. You will get destroyed and worse. So just listen to your husband. And so our government understands the more responsibility you give them, the more power they have. And we do. Husbands, you've been given a responsibility. And so, yes, you do have the right and the authority to expect submission. And so in a perfect marriage, the man gives his wife the royal treatment and treats her like a queen, but the husband gets treated like a king. That's the way it goes in a perfect marriage. Obedience does not mean you're inferior. We all do this Every day of our lives, we make agreements with people that often require our participation and obedience, even though we don't like it. I don't like getting pulled over, but I like cops being able to go after people who do bad things. I don't like getting pulled over, but you know what? I liked it the one day a guy ran a stop sign and almost smoked me, and there happened to be a cop right behind me. And I couldn't have done anything about that guy. I wasn't going to be able to chase him down and do anything, but that cop, all of a sudden, siren came on, he turned around and went after him, and I'm like, that's why I'm going to pull over for you. That's why I'm going to cooperate, and because you have a gun. But you know, we do. We give them authority, you know, because we give them responsibility in certain areas, we also give them certain authority, and we cooperate even when we don't like it. That's just the way the world works. And in society today, we do this in many things. With police, we do it with pilots. We follow all their stupid rules. We watch the stewardess do the little seatbelt demonstration and all these things, and we follow all these dumb rules. We go in when they tell us to do it. We let them treat us like cattle the whole time we're at the airport. Why? Because we don't want to drive somewhere. We want to get there quickly. And so we do. We submit. You know what we don't get to do? We don't get to go up in the cockpit and try to micromanage the pilot. You know what they want us to do? They want us to sit down and shut up. Just stay in your seat. We'll get you there. And we trust them. But for some reason in marriage, we're not allowed to do that. In marriage, we've got to give our wife, equal control of the steering wheel in the airplane. It's like, no, that's not how these things work. We do it with doctors. They devote their lives to studying medicine. We let them gas us and cut us open. And we trust them. Every day, functional societies operate like this, but for some reason, when it comes to the oldest institution, we can't have it that way. And let me say, they are wrong. Most men are pretty happy if their children are taken care of, if they're fed, and they're getting proper treatment in the bed. That's pretty much all it takes to make a man happy. Women, it's kind of a moving target sometimes, but the last part, do you promise? We ask the woman to stand by him in sickness, health, poverty, or wealth, forsaking all others. Remain faithful to him as long as you both shall live. And it's the exact same thing we've already, for the women as it is for the men. We already covered this. And while our world scoffs at the biblical roles for a man and woman, it's worked for 6,000 years. And in the meantime, our world is full of a bunch of medicated men and women that aren't even sure what gender they are. Excuse me if I don't take their marriage advice. And we do. We need to stick to God's way of doing things. And while our perverted country has its version of marriage, it's in no way what the Bible describes. It's in no way what God instituted. And at this church, we only promote and recognize biblical marriages. Some dudes coming, I've been so tired this week of hearing about that woman's wife. They got shot, wife. Women do not have wives. I mean, what on earth? And let me and again, we do. We give people authority of certain things. Guess who those women are going to call if they have problems? If they're in danger, they call the cops. But then they're not willing to cooperate with certain things. And just don't get me going on that. But either way, what it all comes down to, we are actually the ones that support women's rights and autonomy. We believe they have the right to say yes or no to getting marriage. Here's where we're very different than the world too, though. We expect women to fulfill their vows. That's it. Nobody made them get married. But you know what we don't get to do? We don't get to redefine marriage for our weird, twisted, perverted world that thinks two dudes can get married and thinks that you can have two people get married and one not be an authority over the other. That doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. It's not what the Bible says. And so us, expecting women to submit, that is us expecting women to keep their vows that they willingly made, that they bound themselves to. I don't think that's weird. I don't think that, and I know it's not biblical. And so hopefully people just understand what they're getting themselves into. So, Abby, I hope you were paying attention. This is your chance to get out. Nobody's going to make you get bound to Alex. This is your chance. But once you bind yourself to Alex, you don't really get to cry about it. Especially if they're fulfilling their vow. Oh, yeah, but he smells worse than I thought he was going to. So I'm like, try to get him to use a different deodorant or something like that. You're going to have to work through those problems. Anybody gets married, they're going to find out some things about the other one that I wasn't expecting this. Well, that's why we tell you to make these vows ahead of time. It's going to get tricky, and you got to figure it out. And so, with that, let's pray. Dear Lord, I pray this message was a help to everybody. Lord, I just thank you so much for all the married couples here, and Lord, I just pray you help all of us to remember the things that we promised. And Lord, even though it's not always easy and there's going to be difficult times, help us to work through those things. Help us to every day try to live these vows and not take for granted what we have promised. And I just pray that you'll give everyone here strong marriages. In your name we pray. Amen.